Hey, I just got done with a great podcast. I think it's episode 10 with Jennifer, and we are talking about pop psychology statements and processing that. And one of the things that came up in that discussion was about intention. And I think I talked about it on episode 9 as well when we were talking about pop psychology. And I think this is one of those critical components of relational understanding that has to be addressed so that um, people learn to suspend their own reality so that they can hear another person's reality or another person's experience. And I think last time I gave the example of learning how to drive the car. When we think of intention, you think about the day that you were taking your driving test and you had to pass it, and you had to be very intentional about the turn signals and the the pedal and the brake and look left and look right and what is my um, tester doing, and that's a very intentional experience, and it causes a lot of anxiety because we have to be very hyper vigilant and attentive. And once you pass that test, you get better and better at driving. And, most adults, they can drive from one town to another and never think about the pedal or the turn signals or thinking about looking left or looking right or what is my passenger doing. We just do it, and it's very mindless. And um, when we understand that the majority of what we do in our brains is driven very much like the example of the rat, when you're training a mouse, uh, you know, if if I want to train a rat to push a lever every 3 minutes, I do that by being very predictable, by only responding to the rat at the 3 minute mark by giving it food when it pushes the lever. So I don't have control over the rat. I only have control over my response to the rat. So as long as my response is predictable, the rat's dopamine system can pick up on that pattern and it just automatically will push the lever because of that conditioning experience. But if my response is not predictable, then what the rat will do, if I'm giving it food when it pushes the lever at 3 minutes, 1 minute, 4 minutes, 6 minutes, what the rat learns is there's a possibility they could get a reward. So they actually push the lever more often when I'm not predictable. So if I want that to change, I again have to be very predictable in my response. Now, um, in relationships, you can see situations where somebody will say, uh, you know, my partner just lies to me all the time. And I'll say to that person, what do you do about it? And the person says, I don't know. I just don't know what to do about it. So I don't do anything. And really what that means is that you are not um, any more trustworthy than that person is because um, you're not following through with um, even really engaging with it. So there's no predictability other than this person doesn't do anything, so I can do what I want. And it's mindless, but we will say things like, you intended to do that. I know what you were doing. You were trying to get back at me, or lots of different language that we use to pathologize somebody as the sole responsible party to a system. And when you remove this idea that there's intention on another person's part, and you come back to having accountability for what is my contribution to this pattern, to this system, then if I change my response, it forces the pattern to change because I'm no longer predictable. And that person has to make an adjustment to understand what's going to be predictable about me. So when we get rid of all this mind meaning crap we can focus more on behavior and look at what is the behavior, how is that predictable, and what is my contribution to that system, then all of a sudden you have things that you can do. One of the first things I do when I meet with a couple, one is I assess for accountability. Is this person able to admit, mistakes? If they're not, then that's the first step I take, because if there's one party that doesn't have any accountability to the system, it will never change, because that person will continue to assume it's only the other person. So that's my first step. But then I also share with them, in this last podcast, I talked about the communication continuum of passive, assertive, aggressive, or passive aggressive. And the only effective form of communication is assertive, honest, direct, kind, and persistent. Those are the components of being assertive. But each of those, the passive and passive aggressive sides have qualities that align with, or characteristics that align with the Gottman Institute. They're the foremost researcher on relationships. The Gottman Institute's four horsemen, which are criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. So, for instance, with passive communicators, they may be critical, they may be defensive, they may be contemptuous, and they're definitely stonewalling, but all of that tends to be internal perspectives, which tends to pull people away. They will, back away from relationships or isolate themselves. Aggressive relationships, aggressive communicators tend to be critical, defensive, and or contemptuous. And that's, because our brains are wired to fight or flee aggression. All you will ever get from those is fighting, fleeing, or freezing. So, and, passive aggressive is both. Passive aggressive is things like sarcastic humor, snide comments. A passive aggressive comment can be sarcastic humor. You say things with an element of truth and an element of humor. So if the person you're speaking with doesn't like it, then you could say, I was just kidding. And then you throw it on that person as they're the unreasonable party, instead of you having addressed it directly, honestly, honest, direct, kind, and persistent. And I think a component of that is also that if there's a problem that needs to be addressed, it has to be addressed in terms of possibilities. If couples come together and all they do is talk about, what the other person did, then they get lost in attacking and defending, criticizing and defensiveness. And then it falls into contempt, eye rolling, sighing, name calling, things like that. We start to feel really, really helpless, but largely because what they're doing is they're talking about things that cannot be undone. So, I ask you, can you unbrush your teeth? No, you can't unbrush your teeth, but you can communicate about getting to the specifics of what would each of you like to be different, and integrating those realities so that any conflict communication you have is working on addressing possibilities, not trying to unbrush anybody's teeth. And that, again, it starts with knowing my partner is 100% correct in how they look at this situation, just like I am 100% correct in how I look at this, because the wiring in our brains that was put there from our experiences, every experience up till now, is dictating what lens I'm looking through a problem at. So we start from the position of we're both correct. Now my job is to understand how you're also correct. So we understand a problem before we try to solve it. That means if we have an engine we're trying to make run, my husband has half of the bolts, I have half of the bolts, or maybe I have 30 and he's got 60%. It doesn't matter, what contribution there is to any problem. I have to understand, how do you see this? And he has to understand, how do I see this? And, what are each other's realities? And then once we understand how we see it, then we say, okay, what steps do we want to take to start making movement on this? So, if couples, if I go to my husband and I say, you never do the dishes, criticism, he's probably going to point out the last time he did the dishes. I just did them Tuesday. So then we get into an argument over whether that happened, didn't happen, how he ignored my request, which wasn't stated as a request. Anyways, there's lots of stuff that can come from that. Eye rolling, sighing, that's contempt. But if I communicate more effectively and say, I could use some help with the dishes more often, this is me not using a criticism. This is just me having a complaint. People have complaints. It's not that we have them, it's how. And so I need to say it in a way that doesn't put my husband in a shark tank and attack his character or assume he doesn't love me, he doesn't care. And that is what couples tend to do over time when communication is ineffective. We start applying intent, and it gets critical and defensive and contemptuous. So if I say, I could use some help with the dishes more often, a defensive statement would be, fine, I'll just do them on Tuesday. Well, that's not really understanding the problem, because maybe what I need is help on Friday and Monday. And he just comes in using his neural networks, decides how he's going to fix the problem, but it doesn't really fix it. For me, I needed something else. So he has to be willing to be curious about my perspective. Okay, tell me more about that. What would you like to be different? He could even say, what have I done to contribute to that problem? That is not admitting intent. That's just saying, I know you see this as a problem. Are there ways that I've contributed to it that I don't know? I don't have to defend myself. I need to be curious. How does she see the problem? Just like you would if he was stepping on my toes and I say, ow, that hurts. And he looks down, he sees his foot is on there, and he says, oh, sorry, and makes an adjustment. It doesn't mean he intended to step on my foot. He just knows, hey, that hurt, and he makes an adjustment. It doesn't have to be any more intentional than that. So learning to hear it as, oh, so you're perceiving this a little bit like I'm stepping on your toes. What adjustment can I make? I apologize that I did that. That doesn't mean you intended to step on somebody's toes. So then once you both understand the problem, if he says, okay, so you need it Saturday and Monday, then I say to him, what would you like it to be like? And I listen to his perspective. Now, he may not have a perspective. He just, okay, it is what it is, and we go on. But if he does have a perspective, it's also important for me to understand his reality. And once we both understand, then we start making movement on the issue. So we might say, how about you do it on these days, I do it on these days. And if that doesn't work, we'll come back, we'll reassess in 2 weeks, see if that works. And if not, we'll make an adjustment. If that doesn't work, and the reason I say that is because a lot of times people will have a discussion and that didn't work, and they think, my partner doesn't even care, they didn't follow through. It's not a failure of this discussion if that doesn't happen. It just means there's still more about that situation that we don't understand. So we have to come back and address an issue. And so we're always making movement on an issue. It's not problem solving. A problem is only solved when you're away from the problem and you look back and recognize, oh, we don't even have that problem anymore. That's when a problem is solved. So we're not having a problem solving conversation. We are addressing a problem to understand it and make movement. But it has to start from, we're not assuming intent. We're suspending our own judgments to listen and be curious. The opposite of defensiveness is curiosity about the complainer. A complaint is always about the complainer. If I say to you, I don't like spinach, what did you learn about yourself? Nothing. Even if I said it to my husband, you're learning nothing. If I said to him, I don't like your shirt, what did he learn about him? Nothing. He learned I don't like his shirt. If I say, I don't like your attitude, what did he learn about him? Nothing. He learned I don't like his attitude. So he doesn't have to defend it. He doesn't have to correct anything, because he might be correcting it by saying, I'll do the dishes on this day. His job is just to understand my perception. So to not be defensive, you become curious. Curious is listening to understand, asking questions. What are some ways that I've contributed to that problem? What would you like to be different? And then even the complainer has to listen to the other person's perspective if they feel like something about that matters, and then take a step in making movement. So remove the idea of intent. Get rid of this idea of I have no accountability. It's all the other person's fault. 100% of the time, if a person is in therapy and they don't have accountability to the problem, it will always be somebody else's fault, and progress will be a hell of a lot slower, if at all, without accountability. So start with having accountability. I used to be really fat, and guess how I changed that? Admitting that I was fat because I ate too much. So there's different ways of being accountable to change those systems. So keep joining in. I'll keep adding some of these separate situations, and hopefully get Jen to add some too. So we're kind of processing the podcast afterwards and adding some more to it. So subscribe, follow, share, talk differently about mental health, and include the whole system, even if the whole system isn't present. Look at it through a systems lens, and you'll see there's a lot other ways to progress, see progress in your life. Have a great day.